I never thought a single afternoon could feel like it tore my whole life into pieces. But here I was, staring at the reflection in the hallway mirror, and not recognizing the person looking back at me. My stepsisters had cornered me with that quiet, deliberate patience that made every word they spoke feel like it carried gravity I couldn't resist. "You're going to see what you really are," one of them said, her voice soft, almost coaxing, yet underneath it carried a power I hadn't realized they wielded. I laughed nervously at first, trying to brush it off, but when she gently took my hands and led me to the bedroom that had been prepared for me, I felt the first twinge of fear, mixed with a strange, unplaceable excitement. They had laid out everything meticulously: soft dresses that shimmered under the sunlight, makeup that seemed alien in its precision, and accessories that made me wonder if I had ever truly imagined myself in such a way. My heart thudded painfully as they guided me through the first steps, choosing the outfit, slipping into stockings, the unnatural sensation of high heels under my feet. Each motion felt like a performance I was forced into, yet a part of me couldn't deny the delicate thrill of it, the subtle awakening in my chest I'd been too scared to name before. When they started applying the makeup, I kept my eyes averted at first, but eventually curiosity overcame the embarrassment. The mirror reflected a version of me I didn't recognize, but somehow felt like it had always been hiding, whispering in shadows, waiting. My cheeks I'd never seen as expressive, became a canvas, my lips a brushstroke of careful color. Their hands were patient, exacting, yet tender, and for the first time I felt my pulse quicken not with panic but with wonder, as if each stroke revealed a layer of me I didn't know existed. By the time they were done, I hardly wanted to move, afraid I would break the fragile spell they'd cast over my reflection. I wasn't just someone wearing a costume. I felt like I had become something else entirely, something softer, something daring, something undeniably me, even if I didn't know it yet. And yet, a tremor of guilt shook me. What if this wasn't allowed? What if I was betraying everything I had known? My stepsisters smiled at me, sensing my inner turmoil, and it was clear they had expected this conflict. They whispered, almost conspiratorially, that this wasn't a trick, that this was discovery, that maybe I'd been running from it all along. And in that moment, standing on unsteady heels, under their watchful gaze, I understood that my world had just shifted. There was no turning back now. The transformation was more than skin deep. It was a confrontation with a part of myself I had been too hesitant to embrace, and yet, terrifyingly, I wanted to. The first time I walked down the hallway in heels, I felt every eye that wasn't on me, and yet somehow on me, burning with imagined judgment. My stepsisters followed behind, whispering encouragements that sounded almost like spells. "Hold your back straight. That's it, softer, softer." Each word felt like a thread, pulling me into a new version of myself that I wasn't sure I was ready to meet. My body felt strange, every step exaggerated, every movement amplified, and yet with each wobble, I realized my mind was beginning to match the rhythm, a rhythm I hadn't known I could move to. They brought out a mirror so large it reflected the whole room, and I froze. The person staring back at me was unfamiliar, and yet there was a flicker of recognition, a whisper that this had always been possible. My hair, once a simple brown, now flowed in soft waves that framed my face delicately. My eyes seemed larger somehow, more expressive, my cheeks warm with blush that wasn't mine but somehow belonged. I traced my reflection with a trembling finger, feeling the contours of someone I had never dared to imagine, and a strange thrill coursed through me, a mix of fear, awe, and longing I couldn't name. "Do you like what you see?" one of my stepsisters asked, leaning casually against the doorway, her smirk mischievous yet encouraging. I wanted to lie, to tell her it was ridiculous, that this was all a joke, but my voice caught in my throat. There was no denying the truth. I don't know," I whispered, a confession I hadn't even realized I was making to myself. Their smiles softened, almost triumphant but gentle, and they guided me into the living room where the transformation was to continue. Every item they handed me, a delicate necklace, a pair of earrings, a clutch, felt like a symbol of ownership over this new persona I was being forced into. I tried to resist, pulling back, but each refusal was met with a patience that felt almost persuasive, as if they were peeling away layers of me I hadn't known needed peeling. My heart raced, my palms sweated, yet with every brush of fabric and stroke of powder, I felt a subtle, undeniable pull toward this version of myself, a version that had been quietly waiting in the shadow of my own hesitation. We moved to the living room, and they insisted I pose for a series of photographs. I hated the idea at first. It felt invasive, humiliating, yet as the camera clicked and flashed, I felt a strange sense of pride. Each image captured not just a costume, but a revelation. I was learning the subtleties, the tilt of my head, the curve of a wrist, the gentle arch of a brow that made the reflection more than skin deep. I could see glimpses of the person I might become if I embraced this fully, and a shiver ran through me at the thought. By evening, I was exhausted but exhilarated. They had prepared a small tea ceremony for me, complete with soft music and flickering candlelight, as if marking a rite of passage. I sipped the tea, trying to focus on its warmth, yet every glance in the mirror made my chest tighten. I was scared. Scared of who I was becoming, scared of what it meant, and yet, underneath it all, a quiet, persistent part of me whispered, "This is right. This is who you might have always been if only you had dared." When they finally left me alone for a few moments, I stood before the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't just see a reflection, I saw a possibility. My hands traced the lines of my face, my body, my new posture, and I felt a dizzying mix of fear, fascination, and anticipation. The room was silent except for my own breathing, and in that quiet, I realized that the transformation wasn't just about what I wore or how I looked. It was about discovering a truth I had never been brave enough to face. I sank onto the couch, still in heels, still in the soft dress they had insisted I wear, and for the first time in my life, I felt a fragile, trembling sense of acceptance, as if a door I had never known existed had creaked open, letting in a light that was both terrifying and beautiful. And even though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, even though my heart pounded with uncertainty, I knew one thing: nothing would ever feel the same again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the floor in soft, golden streaks, and I woke to a quiet house that felt strangely different, almost alive with possibility. My reflection in the bedroom mirror greeted me like an old friend I hadn't yet dared to know. The night before, they had left me with instructions, little things, tiny gestures to practice. And now, as I ran my fingers through my hair, smoothed the delicate fabric of my dress, I realized that yesterday's experience hadn't just been about clothes or makeup. It had been about awakening, about stepping into a version of myself I'd been too frightened to imagine. When my stepsisters appeared at the doorway again, I froze. Their eyes were bright, sharp, gleaming with a combination of mischief and warmth that made my stomach flutter. "Ready for the next step?" one asked casually, but I could feel the weight behind the words, the quiet insistence that today would push me further. And even though a part of me wanted to say no, to retreat to the safety of my old self, I felt a strange pulse of courage. I think so," I whispered, and the way they smiled at me, approving and yet teasing, made my chest tighten with anticipation. They guided me through a series of exercises that felt both alien and intimate. How to move gracefully in heels, how to hold my head, how to soften my gestures without losing the strength behind them. Each movement felt unnatural at first, clumsy, awkward. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel a rhythm. My stepsisters clapped softly when I managed to pose correctly, their approval mingling with the rising tide of my own self-awareness. I was learning not just to look feminine, but to feel it, to inhabit it, and the sensation was dizzying. By midday, they introduced the idea of presenting myself in public, a small, carefully controlled venture outside the house. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it could escape my chest. "We'll be with you the whole time," they promised, but even their reassurance couldn't quiet the storm of nerves inside me. What if people laughed? What if I couldn't do it? My mind spun with imagined scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. Yet beneath the fear, a whisper persisted, a voice I was beginning to trust, that this was a chance to see myself reflected not just in mirrors, but in the world, to confront the judgment I had hidden from all my life. The outing was surreal. Each step outside the house, each cautious stride, made me hyper-aware of my body, my posture, the way my dress swayed, the subtle curve of my shoulders. People passed by, some barely noticing, others casting curious glances, and each interaction made my heart leap. My stepsisters stayed close, offering guidance in whispered words, steadying my trembling hands when doubt surged like a tide. I realized then that this wasn't just about them shaping me. It was about me discovering how to navigate a world that had always seemed like it might reject me. Back home, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted yet exhilarated. My reflection in the mirror across the room caught my eye, and for the first time I didn't flinch. I studied the curves of my face, the sway of my hair, the way my eyes seemed alive with something new, confidence, perhaps, or maybe just the thrill of having survived a step I had feared I couldn't take. My mind buzzed with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, excitement and hesitation. I was changing, yes, but more importantly, I was becoming. Late that night, alone in the quiet of my room, I let myself examine the paradox I had become. I was scared of who I was becoming, and yet I felt a warmth, a certainty that this self, this softer, more delicate, more daring self was real, was me. I ran my hands over my dress, over the faint blush still lingering on my cheeks, and a small smile broke across my lips. For the first time, I realized that femininity wasn't a mask I was forced to wear. It was a discovery of a part of myself that had been waiting, quietly, patiently, for me to be brave enough to meet it. The days that followed felt like a delicate dance between exhilaration and fear. Every morning, I woke to my reflection as if greeting a stranger I was slowly learning to love, and every evening I fell into bed exhausted, my mind buzzing with the echoes of each interaction. My stepsisters had grown more daring in their lessons, nudging me toward experiences that forced me to confront not just how I looked, but how I felt, how I carried myself, how I imagined the world perceived me, and most terrifyingly, how I perceived myself. It started with something small, a walk through the neighborhood. At first, even the faintest breeze against my dress made my skin tingle, and every sound, a passing car, a dog barking, footsteps behind me felt magnified, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting to judge me. I gripped the strap of my purse tightly, feeling the warmth of my stepsisters' hands at my elbows, their presence both comforting and challenging. "Remember," one whispered, "it's not just about how you look. It's about how you feel." Those words echoed in my head, and I realized they were right. My legs felt unsteady, but with each careful step, I focused not on the eyes around me, not on the imagined criticism, but on the rhythm of my own movements. Slowly, I began to feel the strange, liberating sensation of inhabiting this new body with intention, with pride even. And yet, beneath the growing confidence, fear lingered, fear that I was performing a role, not living as myself, that this self was borrowed rather than real. One afternoon, we visited a small cafe, a test of social poise and composure. The minute I stepped inside, the world felt sharper, louder, more immediate. The eyes of strangers seemed to pierce through me, questioning, curious, perhaps even judging. My palms sweated, my heart raced, yet I forced myself to stand tall, to breathe slowly, to speak in a voice that trembled at first but steadied with each passing moment. My stepsisters guided me subtly, a gentle hand on my back, a soft correction on posture, a whispered reminder of a smile, and I began to see the power in small gestures, the way a tilt of the head or a soft laugh could shape perception. When a waiter complimented my appearance, my chest constricted with a mix of embarrassment and thrill. I had never imagined hearing words like that directed at me, never imagined feeling their weight and truth without shame. I realized in that moment that femininity, or at least the version I was discovering, wasn't about the clothes or the makeup alone. It was about inhabiting a space, claiming it with subtlety and grace, and learning that the world could respond not with ridicule, but with acknowledgement. Returning home that day, I collapsed into the armchair, exhausted but buzzing with exhilaration. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught my eye, and I studied it with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. The person staring back at me was unmistakably different, softer, more deliberate, alive in a way I hadn't known I could be, and yet there was a thread of continuity, a reminder that this transformation was not theft of identity but revelation. I traced my fingers along the curve of my cheek, the delicate slope of my jaw, and felt a quiet warmth bloom in my chest. Later, as night settled over the house, my stepsisters gathered around, each smile carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of progress. They didn't lecture or praise, They simply shared the quiet intimacy of shared understanding. And in that space, I realized that my fear was not of becoming feminine. It was of embracing a truth I had long denied. Each brush of fabric, each step in heels, each mirrored glance was not an imposition but an invitation. To step fully into myself, to confront the part of me that had been hiding, trembling, waiting. By the time I finally lay in bed, I understood that the transformation was no longer only external. It was a reckoning with identity, a negotiation with self-perception, a confrontation with both fear and desire. I was not merely dressing up. I was uncovering layers I had feared to touch, each one revealing fragments of a self I had never allowed to bloom. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, even though every mirror and street corner could become a stage of judgment, I felt a flicker of something I had never known. Agency, ownership, and perhaps even love for the person I was becoming. The following week tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. My stepsisters had grown bolder, and I knew this next phase would take me beyond the walls of comfort into a space where the world's gaze felt heavy and tangible. They insisted I meet a few acquaintances from their circle, harmless, ordinary people, they said, but the thought of stepping outside my carefully curated bubble sent tremors of panic through me. My reflection in the mirror that morning was both comforting and cruel. The soft waves of my hair, the subtle shimmer of the dress, the gentle curve of my shoulders, they reminded me of the progress I'd made, and yet whispered warnings of scrutiny and exposure. The first encounter was a simple cafe meetup, but even that simple act felt like an expedition into a storm. My stepsisters flanked me, offering their guidance in whispers. Smile lightly, tilt your head, soften your voice. Each suggestion was a thread in a tapestry I was only beginning to weave. My heart pounded like a drum as we approached the table where a small group of their friends waited. Faces turned. Eyes scanned me quickly, then looked away, but each glance left a mark, an indelible reminder that the world outside was unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, even when no harm was intended. I forced myself to speak, to laugh when prompted, to react naturally to their small talk. The tremor in my voice was faint but there, and I caught it in the mirrored reflection of the glass behind them. My stepsisters noticed, of course, but they didn't correct me with bluntness. Instead, a hand brushed lightly over mine under the table, a subtle, grounding gesture. It was the first time I realized that support didn't always need to speak. It could be felt quietly in touch and presence. By the time the outing was over, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The world outside hadn't mocked me outright, hadn't rejected me, but I felt the invisible weight of judgment in every glance, every half-smile, every sideways glance. And yet, something surprising had emerged, a spark of pride. I had faced it, however tentatively, and survived. My reflection in the car window on the drive home showed a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, resilience, perhaps, or the fragile beginnings of self-acceptance. The next day, my stepsisters introduced a more subtle challenge. They wanted me to choose my own outfit entirely, without guidance, without whispered hints or corrections. Panic rose immediately. I had relied on them for so long, and suddenly the responsibility was mine. I paced the room, fingers grazing fabrics, debating colors, textures, shapes. Every choice felt monumental, as if a single misstep could undo weeks of careful progress. Yet as I pieced together an ensemble, experimenting with combinations, stepping back to study myself in the mirror, I felt a thrill unlike any I'd known. It was ownership, pure and electric. This self, this appearance, this presence was mine to craft. When they finally saw me, they didn't gasp or clamor with praise. They simply smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of my courage. "You're ready for more," one said softly, and I realized that readiness wasn't about perfection. It was about willingness, a willingness to confront the world, to confront myself, and to keep moving even when fear trembled in my chest. That evening, alone in my room, I traced my fingers over the folds of my dress, over the curves of my reflection. I could feel the echo of every lesson, every whispered encouragement, every small triumph. But alongside the warmth, a subtle unease lingered, a reminder that acceptance, both from the world and from myself, wasn't instantaneous. It was earned in moments like these, in quiet introspection and deliberate action. I lay back on my bed, the fabric of the dress soft against my skin, and let my mind wander across the terrain of transformation I was navigating. I thought about the way my stepsisters had guided me, about the balance of force and patience, about how each step forward had been both terrifying and exhilarating. And I realized, with a shiver that traveled down my spine, that this was more than a journey of appearance. It was a journey of identity, of self-perception, of courage. Each reflection in the mirror, each measured step, each careful smile was a negotiation between who I had been and who I was becoming. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams that twisted and shimmered, reflecting both my anxieties and my aspirations. I dreamed of walking through streets crowded with faces, some familiar, some strange, all gazing at me with curiosity and judgment. Yet within those dreams, I walked taller, smiled more freely, and felt an exhilaration that outshone the fear. And when morning came, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the process had already begun in earnest. I was no longer merely being shaped. I was shaping myself, in tandem with the guidance of those who had shown me the possibilities I had never dared to imagine. That morning, I woke to the familiar glare of sunlight filtering through the curtains, but instead of comfort, it brought a gnawing anticipation. My stepsisters had planned something new, a small gathering in the park, a casual meeting with neighbors and friends they assured me were safe. My stomach twisted as I dressed, choosing carefully, adjusting each fold of fabric, smoothing each crease, all while my mind raced with the familiar questions. Would they see through me? Would they judge? Would I crumble under their eyes? Stepping outside, I felt the chill of the air against my skin, the rough texture of the pavement beneath my heels, and the surreal awareness that every passerby was a potential observer, a potential judge. My stepsisters flanked me, their presence a steadying force, and whispered gentle instructions. Relax your shoulders, breathe on your space. I nodded, swallowing hard, forcing myself to adopt the posture they had drilled into me countless times. Each step was deliberate, each movement calibrated, and yet I felt an undercurrent of fear that refused to leave. The park was quiet at first, but soon people began to drift by, joggers, parents with strollers, children chasing each other across the grass. Their eyes brushed past me, some lingering, some indifferent, and each glance sent a ripple through my chest. My stepsisters smiled reassuringly, but I could feel the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. This was no longer a private lesson. This was a test of presence, of poise, of courage in the wild, unpredictable world. A woman walking her dog paused and looked directly at me, her gaze curious but not hostile. My heart leapt, a mixture of fear and excitement, and I felt the sweat prickling my palms. I smiled awkwardly, and she returned it with a nod before moving on. My stepsisters squeezed my hands, barely noticeable but grounding, and I felt a surge of pride. I had survived an encounter, no matter how small, and the thrill of it hummed through me. But as the sun climbed higher, a subtle shift occurred. A group of teenagers passed by, whispering and glancing in my direction. One smirked, nudging his friend, and though no words were spoken directly to me, I felt the sting of imagined ridicule. My chest tightened, my steps faltered, and a flush rose to my cheeks. My stepsisters noticed immediately, and one whispered softly but firmly, "Focus on yourself, not them." I took a deep breath, recalling every lesson, every adjustment, every careful practice, and forced myself to lift my chin. That night back home, I stared at my reflection in the mirror for what felt like hours. The faint scarlet of embarrassment still lingered on my cheeks, a memory of the tension I had felt in the park. I ran my hands over the soft fabric of my dress, over the gentle waves of my hair, and realized that femininity, or the self I was cultivating, was not a shield from judgment. It was a choice to face it, to stand, to breathe, to move with intention even when the world might not understand. Sleep was restless, filled with fragmented dreams of streets filled with gazes, whispers, and invisible critiques. Yet in those dreams, I also walked taller, smiled brighter, and felt a strange exhilaration threading through the fear. Morning came, and with it, a quiet determination. I began to understand that transformation wasn't just external. It was a negotiation with the world and with myself, a delicate dance between vulnerability and courage, fear and acceptance. Days bled into each other with lessons, outings, and practice. I began to notice subtle shifts within myself, a tilt of the head that felt natural, a way of walking that carried rhythm instead of awkwardness, a softening of voice that no longer felt forced. Mirrors became allies rather than adversaries, reflecting not just appearance but intent, presence, and authenticity. My stepsisters continued to guide me, their methods blending patience and challenge, but increasingly I relied on my own instincts, my own sense of self emerging through each carefully measured movement. And yet, doubts lingered, faint but persistent. Was this self truly me, or a version shaped by others' expectations? Could I navigate the world without their constant guidance? The questions circled like shadows at the edge of my consciousness, but with each answered glance in a mirror, each interaction survived without faltering, I felt my confidence grow. The internal conflict between fear and desire, hesitation and exhilaration, became not a cage but a compass, guiding me deeper into understanding, self-expression, and acceptance. As I lay in bed that night, the soft hum of the house settling around me, I traced my fingers over the folds of my dress and the gentle curve of my reflection in the bedside mirror. For the first time, I recognized the duality of my journey. The external transformation intertwined seamlessly with the internal, each movement, each glance, each quiet breath a step toward discovering the self I had long denied. I felt fragile yet unbroken, nervous yet exhilarated, and with a faint, trembling smile, I whispered to the reflection before me, "I am becoming." The week that followed was a whirlwind of anticipation and unease. My stepsisters had planned something they described as a true test, and the idea gnawed at me relentlessly. It wasn't just about clothes, makeup, or the careful movements I had practiced endlessly. It was about stepping into a world where nothing was curated, nothing was controlled, where the gaze of strangers could pierce through every layer of armor I had built. The thought of it left my stomach tied in knots, yet beneath the fear, a pulse of excitement thrummed that I couldn't ignore. The day arrived with a sky the color of pale steel, a muted backdrop to the storm of nerves inside me. I dressed carefully, selecting a flowing dress with subtle patterns that balanced elegance and comfort, and applied makeup with a hand that trembled despite months of practice. Each brushstroke, each adjustment of fabric, each curling of hair felt monumental. My reflection stared back at me, calm and deliberate, yet I could see the tiny fissures of fear in my eyes. My stepsisters arrived, their smiles soft but knowing, and they led me out of the house into the waiting car with quiet confidence. The destination was a bustling marketplace, a cacophony of colors, sounds, and scents, far larger and more public than anything I had experienced in my cross-dressing journey. I could feel my pulse hammering, my chest tight, my hands clammy as we navigated through the throng. My stepsisters offered whispered encouragements, gentle corrections, subtle adjustments, but increasingly, I realized the weight of my presence rested solely on my own shoulders. Each step was a negotiation with gravity, with balance, with the sudden awareness of every pair of eyes that might glance my way. At first, I froze under the unrelenting gaze of passers-by. Children stared openly, their curiosity unfiltered and merciless, and adults occasionally glanced with subtle judgment. I felt my chest constrict, my legs wobble, a flinch rising in my voice when I tried to speak. My stepsisters stayed close, their hands grazing mine, their presence a tether to sanity, yet I knew I couldn't rely on them forever. I had to navigate this alone. And then something shifted. A small incident, a dropped scarf, a passerby helping me retrieve it forced me to interact, to speak, to engage. The words trembled at first, hesitant and unsure, but with each syllable, a strange confidence began to thread through my fear. I realized that the world was not a monolith of judgment. It was a collection of moments, some challenging, some kind, each one shaping me in subtle, transformative ways. My stepsisters watched silently, letting me own the experience, their pride hidden behind soft smiles. By midday, exhaustion had set in, but so had exhilaration. I moved through the marketplace with a fluidity I had never known, aware of my reflection in shop windows, the sway of my dress, the tilt of my head, the rhythm of my movements. Every glance from strangers no longer felt like a threat but a mirror, reflecting back a version of myself I had only glimpsed in the safety of my home. I realized then that femininity, confidence, and identity were not about perfection. They were about presence, about inhabiting a space fully, deliberately, authentically. Later, we stopped at a quiet cafe tucked into a side street, a place where the intensity of the marketplace faded into gentle murmurs and soft sunlight. My stepsisters encouraged me to order, to interact, to speak freely, and I felt the tremor of fear give way to a subtle thrill. Each word spoken, each movement executed, each glance met with acknowledgement became a tiny victory, a confirmation that I could navigate the world as this self, fully and without apology. Returning home, I collapsed into my bedroom, my dress rumpled, my makeup slightly smudged, yet my heart raced with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I stared at my reflection for what felt like hours, tracing the lines of my face, the gentle waves of my hair, the subtle confidence in my posture. The mirror reflected someone transformed, yes, but more than that, someone awake, aware, and alive in a way I had never known. That night, alone and finally quiet, I allowed myself to confront the deepest questions that had haunted me. Who was I beneath the clothes, the makeup, the carefully practiced movements? Was this self authentic, or merely an echo of others' guidance? The answer came slowly, almost imperceptibly as I traced my hands over my reflection. This self had always existed, dormant and hesitant, waiting for the courage to emerge. The external transformation had been the key, the catalyst, but the real change was internal, a reclamation of identity, a gentle, profound awakening to who I truly was. I lay in bed, exhausted yet exhilarated, and whispered softly to the reflection in the mirror across the room. I am me, fully, finally, and without fear. It was not a proclamation, not yet a declaration, but a vow, a quiet promise to myself. And as sleep finally claimed me, I felt a fragile, beautiful certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I had begun to live, not just exist, in the skin and soul I had long denied. Morning arrived with a quiet that felt almost sacred. Sunlight spilled across my room, soft and forgiving, warming my skin and casting gentle patterns across the walls. For the first time in weeks, I didn't rush to adjust my hair, my dress, my posture. I lingered before the mirror, tracing the contours of my face with reverent fingers, feeling the familiar curve of my cheeks, the subtle arch of my brows, the soft waves of hair that framed me like a halo. The person staring back at me was undeniably me, familiar yet reborn, delicate yet strong, anxious yet confident. My stepsisters entered quietly, carrying breakfast, their eyes shining with a mixture of pride and affection. "Today," one whispered, "you walk the day entirely on your own." My heart thudded wildly at the thought. Every lesson, every practice, every small victory in heels and fabrics and mirrors had led to this. The moment I would navigate the world without guidance, without tethered reassurance, without anyone else shaping my steps. And yet, deep within, I felt a curious calm. I had practiced, stumbled, learned, and survived. The nervous tremor in my chest had softened into anticipation. Stepping outside, the morning air filled my lungs, crisp and electric. I adjusted my dress, checked my reflection in the car window, and felt an unexpected thrill. This was no longer a performance. This was living. Each step down the street was deliberate, fluid, a rhythm I now owned. The world unfolded around me, unpredictable yet benign, faces curious but fleeting, moments passing without judgment or fear. I realized then that the terror I had felt for so long had been more internal than external. The true challenge had always been accepting myself, fully, in the skin and form I now inhabited. I walked through the marketplace again, the streets I had once found overwhelming, the faces I had feared, and now each glance felt like a note in a melody I was learning to play. Children's eyes sparkled with unfiltered curiosity, adults' glances were fleeting, and I met each one with calm, natural poise. I noticed subtle details I had missed before, the way a gentle tilt of the head could soften a gaze, the way a smile could shape interactions, the quiet power in simply existing unapologetically. With each step, my heart expanded, not with fear or worry, but with an almost dizzying exhilaration, a recognition that I had claimed my space in the world as myself. By afternoon, I found a quiet park bench, sat, and let myself breathe. The breeze caught my hair, and the sun warmed my shoulders. I closed my eyes and allowed memories of the past weeks to flow over me. The trembling first attempts in heels, the quiet lessons whispered in mirrors, the cautious outings with stepsisters, the small victories, the fears faced and survived. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of who I had become, a story stitched together with patience, courage, and love, both their love and the love I was beginning to feel for myself. And then I noticed it, the reflection in a nearby window, subtle yet unmistakable. I studied it without flinching. The face staring back was confident, gentle, radiant, and entirely real. My heart swelled with understanding. The transformation was never just about clothing or makeup, posture or gestures. It had been about claiming an identity I had denied, nurturing a self I had feared, and allowing the layers of doubt, anxiety, and hesitation to peel away. I was not acting. I was existing, fully and deliberately, in the person I had always been meant to become. Evening fell with a quiet glow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I returned home, exhausted yet serene, and my stepsisters greeted me not with instruction, but with warmth and quiet pride. No words were necessary. The room seemed to hum with unspoken acknowledgement of the journey I had completed. For the first time, I didn't hesitate before the mirror. I studied myself, let my eyes linger, and allowed a soft smile to bloom. I had emerged through fear, through uncertainty, through moments of self-doubt, and arrived at a truth undeniable and unshakable. I was whole, I was me, and I was enough. That night, I sat by the window, feeling the cool breeze brush against my cheeks, listening to the gentle rhythm of the world outside. I reflected on the path I had walked, the lessons, the challenges, the small victories, the quiet triumphs. And I understood something profound. Transformation is not a destination, nor is it a performance for others. It is the unfolding of self, the gentle and deliberate act of stepping into authenticity, and the courage to let the world witness it. I traced my fingers along my reflection, whispered softly, "I am here, I am me, and I am free." Sleep came finally, deep and untroubled, and in that rest I carried not only the memories of the journey, but a profound, enduring certainty. The mirror would always reflect the person I had become, delicate, strong, fearless, and radiant. And in every reflection, every glance, every quiet moment of self-recognition, I knew. This was not just a transformation of appearance, but a revelation of self, complete and eternal. I had become the person I had long feared to embrace. And in doing so, I had discovered freedom, beauty, and an unwavering sense of belonging within my own skin. The journey was complete, yet endless in its subtlety, for the act of becoming is never truly finished. It is lived, breathed, cherished, and nurtured each day, in every step, every glance, every heartbeat. And as I finally closed my eyes, content and unafraid, I understood. I had discovered not only who I could be, but who I truly was, and that truth, radiant and tender, would carry me forward forever.